在过去的15年中，人们都创立这种以规则为基准的这个全球秩序，差不多所有的国家，除了这个韩国，除了那个朝鲜这些国家之外的话，基本上所有国家都参与进来了，因为大家发现这样做的话会给他们带来共同的，每一个行业的领导者基本上的话都尊重这些规则。如果说孔子还活在今天的话，他肯定也会非常高兴看到这样的一个秩序。但是我觉得现在这个时期的话已经结束了。我们看到在过去的几年中，我们一场改革正在酝酿中，还有这种这个社交媒体以及那些虚假新闻给大家带来了很多的不安，以及在金融行业，在机会以及在性别等等方面的话，有很多不平等的事件在出现。这种大众主义现在，这种情绪的话，已经变得非常的不理性。那我们可以很轻松的忽略这些问题。那么，正如我们说的，这种灰犀牛事件有可能就会发生。比如说，我给大家举3个例子：特朗普总统。不管你对他个人的看法如何，他肯定不是一个傻瓜，他并不愚蠢。如果说真的很傻的话，他肯定不能成为美国的总统。他在美国煽动了这种民众的情绪，是差不多是第一个这种风格的这种总统。我们不能把我们的这种规律放在他的身上，可能是不适用的，因为当他要把美国放在首位的时候，他是真心实意这样想的。我觉得我们不太可能会发生一个这种贸易战。习近平主席也回应了，习近平主席以他的这种理性的回答了那关于特朗普的那些不理性的言辞。英国选择投票要离开这个欧盟，忽略了这可能会带来的后果，让英国再次繁荣。这是我们的口号。正是在这样的口号的煽动下，我们投票离开了欧盟。虽然有可能结果是不错的，但是我们不知道这场赌博对于这样的中等规模的国家到底会有什么样的后果。而且我觉得这个对欧盟未来的发展。
Discussion: Black swans are low probability and largely unknowable events with outcomes that can be extremely consequential for financial markets and the world at large, and we've seen that in the past. Gray rhinos are more probable events that can also have a major impact on society, but we tend not to factor them in enough into our thinking and our financial analysis, and there are plenty of those in the world right now, and we'll get to that. And the Minsky moment is when asset bubbles collapse, which can cascade into systemic risk, systemic crisis. As an example, when the U.S. housing bubble burst in 2006 and 2007, this led to a crisis that affected markets everywhere. Now, these 3 concepts are germane to discussion around the likelihood of the next global crisis. So today's panel will focus on 3 things. What are the conditions for a crisis, how to tackle them, and how to prevent or mitigate the next crisis, whatever it may be. So let me introduce the panelists, starting from my left. Dr. Ba is Chief China Economist from Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing. Sir Jerry Grimstone is Chairman of Standard Life and Vice Chairman of Barclays. Iwata-san is President of the Japan Center for Economic Research. Karat Galimbatov is Governor of the Astana International Finance Center. And Mr. Li is the former Chairman and CEO of the Export-Import Bank of China. So let's begin with some global perspective. Jerry, let me start with you. Perhaps you can kick it off as Chairman of a global financial services business. Do you think financial markets are overly optimistic about the world economy? Are investors properly modeling in these gray rhinos? How do you see the world? Are we potentially staring down a Minsky moment?
That's a great question. My belief is that we are living in a time of extraordinary uncertainty.
Microphone, please.
Push the button.
Let's try again. That's better. Thank you. My belief is that we are living in a time of
extraordinary uncertainty, which until the last few weeks markets were pretty happy to ignore. The opium of cheap money, which we've become addicted to over recent years, certainly fueled a bull market. But if you look at things like market turnover, probably the least popular bull market ever. We've all been happy participants, but deep down, many people like me believed that it was not going to last. And the return to volatility that we're now experiencing tells me that the good times are coming to an end. So to answer your question directly, markets were certainly over-optimistic. Now, why was this? Look, of course, a lot of time in the last 50 years, people have spent time creating a rules-based world order, which pretty much every country, let's exclude North Korea and Albania for a moment, pretty much every country was happy to follow, because they saw a mutual interest in so doing. Leaders in every field were generally respected. Confucius would have felt quite at home. People knew their place. But I believe that history will show that period has now ended. I've thought for the last couple of years that a revolution is underway. Social media and fake news have ignited the anger of the dispossessed, and inequalities in any field, financial, access to opportunity, sexual, are no longer tolerated. Populism is replacing rationality, and the markets find this impossible to model. And to ignore it, therefore, was the easy option. I think the grey rhinos are getting ready to charge, and let me quickly name three. President Trump, whatever one might think of him personally, is absolutely and certainly not a fool. He is not a stupid man. You don't become president of the USA if you are stupid, and it is very dangerous to think otherwise. He has tapped into a vein of popular anger in the US. He's one of the first of the great populist presidents, and his present actions, like it or not, have a democratic legitimacy. Don't sit here applying our rationality necessarily to President Trump. When he says, put America first, he means it. I don't think a full-blown trade war is likely, and it was very interesting this morning where President Xi has met the unreasonableness of Trump with the reasonableness of President Xi. A very effective tactic, but it's very hard to see where that's going to get to. Another grey rhino, my country, United Kingdom, voted to leave the European Union, largely ignorant of the consequences that would follow. Make Britain great was the slogan that caused my country to vote to leave the European Union. Things could turn out all right, but at the present time, nobody really knows. An amazing gamble for a medium-sized country to take, and also, I think, very harmful for the future development of the European Union. And my third grey rhino, Russia. Russia, under President Putin, is conducting a low-level warfare against the West, including hotspots such as extraordinary incursions into Ukraine and Syria. He's a Tsar, intent on creating a new, greater Russia. And if you look at it in that context, his actions are almost entirely predictable. But to rational market participants, they've been almost entirely unanticipated. But having said all of that, politicians around the world have become pretty good at dealing with crises. Capital reservoirs have been topped up and are now higher than they have ever been. Market participants and institutions such as mine, we're generally awash with liquidity. Regulation has been massively strengthened. Governance of financial institutions, which I'm a passionate advocate of, is a major line of defence. Are we staring down a Minsky moment? Minsky's great work was published in 1998, and his moment of glory came 10 years later with the global financial crisis. I think we've all learnt a great deal since then, so I'm not expecting his moment to return. But I said at the start, I am expecting periods of high volatility. Very good news for active fund managers and for investment banks.
Well, very early here in the panel, we've very quickly dispensed with any risk that this would all be about unabashed optimism. So with that segue, Owada-san, can you share some of your thoughts 10 years after the crisis that Jerry just referred to? Resiliency, built-in regulations, whether it's Japan but also more around the world. Where are we in all of this? How are we positioned to handle the next shock? You got to turn on.
Financial very much strengthened after the global financial crisis because of the macro-prudential policy and the micro-prudential policy instrument are now well prepared, and the international banking system becoming more sound. They have more capital buffer, and also more improved liquidity management. And also there is a stress test in order to detect the risk of crisis. And so therefore, I should say there has been some progress made, but still I cannot say we are these framework is sufficiently resilient against the next crisis. Therefore, it's too early to say our financial resiliency is sufficiently strong. I want to mention 3 factors which we should be concerned in order to strengthen the financial resiliency in the world. The first one is role of fintech, technological development so rapid. The recently Tokyo market, this fintech company had the massive money flow, 57 billion yen from Czech money. This is one fintech company issuing cryptocurrency. And this suggests this fintech is still not strong enough against the cyber attack. Mm-hmm. And some fintech, like Ripple, aims to replacing the existing international payment system, like SWIFT, by cryptocurrencies, XPR. So they are issuing this cryptocurrency. They want to replace it, the existing international payment system. But maybe this cryptocurrency is still fragile against the cyber attack, and this may lead to systemic risk. And in addition, the macro-prudential or the micro-prudential policy framework does not cover these internet companies. So outside of the scope of the existing regulation system. So therefore, this is one of the potential risks which would erode the resiliency of current financial system. And the second one is international cooperation of among central banks. During the global financial crisis, there had been a progress among major central banks. That is the international dollar swap arrangement, which really worked very well to prevent the further widespread liquidity crisis over the world by having this arrangement. And the non-U.S. central bank can issue dollar liquidity on the domestic market. This is a very amazing event, I find. And but I find at the same time, this network is not sufficiently covered all the countries. Some of the countries requested, may I enter this swap arrangement? Some of them succeeded, but others not. And I find it's the best thing to do is establish a new IMF-centered swap arrangement. But this is the ideal way. It takes a long time, maybe over the medium time. But at the regional level, I find the Chiang Mai Initiative multilateralization. This is the foreign reserve pooling, and the total amount of this pooling is $240 billion. And but I find it a good thing to further strengthen this regional safety net. ASEAN plus 3 countries, also the member of this Chiang Mai Initiative Multilateralization and AMRO, ASEAN Plus 3 Macro Surveillance Office, must be strengthened. And I find it meaningful. Over the medium term, they established the Asian Monetary Fund. AMRO should be developed into this new entity, which would correspond to the European attempt to establish European Monetary Fund. Today, they have their European Monetary Stability Mechanism, but this can be transformed into new European Monetary Fund. Maybe it's a good thing for Asia to have this kind of new entity in the Asian region. And the third thing is after the global financial crisis, debt accumulated too much, both the private and public. In the case of China, corporate debt is 170% of nominal GDP, which is larger than the case of Japan during the bubble period, 140%. Japan, we have 230% of nominal GDP public debt. This is a biggest gray rhino in Japan. But for the moment, we have made a projection. In the course of 2020-25, there may be the coming of the day of recognition on the debt crisis, because our net private financial asset, this size may be becoming smaller than the total government debt outstanding. So according to empirical study, we find sometimes this two variables.
根据经验主义的研究呢，我们是这样想的，因此
I finalize my word.
最后总结一下。
This public debt issue now, for the moment, BOJ embarked quantitative and qualitative monetary easing and yield curve controlled and a massive purchase, 40% of existing government debt absorbed by BOJ. Therefore, I find that the day of recognition somehow postponed. But in the exit process from this unconventional monetary policy, this gray rhino reappear.
Garrett, just building on Jerry and Owada-san, we've talked some geopolitical risks. We've talked some of the financial risks. Gray rhinos across Asia. What would you like to add to this conversation? How do you think about the risks and what should we do about them?
I would like also to mention that I think 2008 was exactly the year when the Minsky moment happened, also in Kazakhstan. Because the previous 2004 till 2007, it was really boom of real estate, and then it was, let's say, irresponsible behavior of some particular banks, and 2 out of 4 systemic banks which were too big to fail, been in pre-bankruptcy situation. And I think then it was a huge bailout program from the government and sovereign wealth fund. I'm wondering that even 10 years after, if we are talking about particular countries, I think for different Asian countries, it's a different story. So we are still not concluded all the lessons which was done from this global crisis, and particularly regional execution of this crisis. So first of all, I think for many countries, it's still the issue is it's not deep depths of the capital markets. And if the capital markets are relatively small to the banking sector, is always create a problem of over leverage. So this is, I think, the first. The second is the rule of law. So everybody is talking about rule of law, structural reforms. It's very difficult to really start to implement it. And number 3 is I would like to support my Japanese colleague in terms of the fintech. So it's from a different point of view. From one point of view is really what is Madame Lagarde yesterday mentioned during the dinner. We need to figure out what is kind of regulation on fintech and what kind of the cooperation between monetary authorities should be done in order to, let's say, to design all the framework, how the risk looks like, what is the mapping from one side. But from the other side is like a new reality. And in the same dinner, Jack Ma mentions that if you don't want to, how to regulate, how you can regulate it. And the approaches from yesterday cannot focus on the kind of future development. We now see that companies like Google and Alibaba already can replace particular segment of the traditional old-fashioned banking system. But how to regulate them? What do we mean by regulation on this? I think so. This is very important questions, and I think that fintech is a new reality is coming. Even let's say conventional fintech. I'm not talking about DLT, but the conventional fintech is coming, and I think it's very important if the traditional banking sector. And by the way, Minsky in his work mentions that the role of the traditional banking would decline in the future. That would be replaced by kind of new technologies. But how to design the regulation is very important questions. We are in Kazakhstan create the special jurisdiction based on English common law principles, which is, I think, huge development in the region towards rule of law. And at the same time, we want to kind of balance development of capital markets, traditional banking, and also the fintech to allow to the particular companies also walk through regulation, but in a certain sandbox, which is approaches financial conducting authorities in London or monetary authorities of Singapore. So this is the idea, is just to see that the financial sector should be in line with the development of the new technologies. This is reality, including DLT. And this is a very important question now for everybody. So we are watching what is the Japanese regulation authorities are doing, what is US authorities are doing, what is the approach in London, in UK. It's definitely clear that the G20 clarifies that probably cryptocurrency is not the traditional meaning of currency, but anyway new technologies. And it seems like it's a big future for blockchain-enabled technologies, but how implement them to the framework of the global financial regulations?
Thank you. So let's look specifically at China and move to China. So Mr. Li, the biggest gray rhino today may be the rise of protectionist sentiment in the United States. President Xi gave a very clear, concise speech this morning around global cooperation and openness. You know, how do you see the risks and the downside case from global trade to the financial markets, and any potential for a Minsky moment here? I realize I'm giving you the most controversial question. So,
may I ask for those who don't speak English, kindly put your earphone on before I make my Chinese remarks. OK， 我想呢，这个总的来说啊，这个
In general，
这个无论是黑天鹅还是灰犀
in
牛
it
这种金融风险
the black swan
都是
or grey
难以
rhino,
避免的。
financial risks are
我不相
inevitable.
信，就是出风险是个绝对的问题，
But it
不
is
出
a
风险是一个相对
relative
的问题。
concept.
那么也就是说，我不
There
相信
is
哪一个
always
银行或者
risk,
哪一个企
but
业
whether
或者
the
哪一
risk
个
will
公司，
attack us
它
is
只
a
愿意
relative
发展到
concept.
一定水平，它就不再发展了。
No
大家
company
都是想不
wants
断的
to
发展，
stop
不断的做
at
大，
a certain
所以它这
scale
个
of
风险是
development.
肯定会
All
聚集的，
businesses want
包
to
括这个金
evolve
融机构，
bigger,
对吧？它也会
and
这
in
个
this
聚集的风险。
evolution,
所以
risks
作为
may
监管单位，
get
如果想把
accumulated
这
and
个
built
风
up.
险全部屏蔽掉，
As regulators,
这个或者把风险
if we
全部
want to
覆盖掉，我觉得是
cover
不太
all
可能
possible
的。
risks,
为
it
什么？
is
因
just a
为
mission
作为监管机构
impossible.
来说，它的已
As
知
a regulatory
一定是
authority,
小于它的未知。
the
未来
known
的事情是
is
没有发生
smaller
的，
than
因此
the
它很难
unknown.
去预测，它也很难去
There are
预先
risks
去监管。
that
所以
are
风险
that
的
may
控制呢
surface in
是
the
一个非常
future,
困难的问题。
so risk control is
去
very
回答你的问
difficult.
题，就是这个贸易
And to answer the
这种争
question
端，
what
中美
might
之间的
be
贸易
the
争端会
negative
不会
impacts
引发什
from
么
the
新的
protectionism
灰犀牛
and
啊
the trade wars as to whether it may lead to
我
a
觉得
Minsky
中
movement.
国不至于。
I don't
因
think
为
it is an
中国首
immediate
先刚
future
才这
in
个
China.
日本的朋友讲到是中
And
国
so
的这个公司
Japanese
债是很高，但
governor
是中国的
has
公司债
mentioned the
都是内
corporate
债，
debt
就日
might
本
be
的债
high
也
in
都是内
China,
债，所以
similar for
日本
Japan,
的
but both
金融风险
of
我
our
觉得就
corporate
不是那么
debts
高，中
are
国也不是那么
internal
高，
debts
就是这个债务的风险不会很高，
do
因
not
为它是内
lead
债，
to
不是
high
外债，
risk
因此它没有
in debt.
货币错配
It
的
is
这样
not
一个问题
external
存在。
debts. So there is no mismatching of currencies. So I think there are risks, but controllable. So I don't think there is a high risk or high likelihood that the trade wars and protectionism may lead to Green Rhino or Minsky movement in the immediate future. Besides, we have giant domestic market. And I don't think the war is for real. Sometimes trade war can be leveraged as a tool to open China's market. Trump and his administration believes that the benefits for U.S. are fewer than the benefits for China, and they don't consider it as fair. That's why they want to leverage trade war as a tool to open China's market bigger so as to gain more benefits. China is in this continual process of reform and opening up, and that will need a process. I don't think the Black Swan or Rhino will come in the immediate future. I don't know whether I have addressed the question.
Yeah, you have. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Dr. Ba, let's turn to risks within China. Chinese policymakers and regulators have been moving aggressively to tackle domestic gray rhino risks, to prevent more black swans from materializing. Which regulatory and organizational changes do you think are particularly important in addressing these risks? What else do you think the regulators could be doing?
Thank you. I will follow suit of Governor Li and speak in Chinese. In the Chinese financial sector, there is a saying that whenever there is an 8 in the year, there will be turmoil, like in 1998 Asian financial crisis. 2008 subprime crisis in the United States, and now here comes 2018. Is that a cycle? What are the domestic and internal risks that we are faced with? U.S. as an important international currency when there is the increase of interest to attract capital, because of the currency mismatch and the maturity mismatch in developing and emerging markets, risks will be looming. The international market attaches great importance to such concerns, and for China, there are several areas of risks that we need to pay attention to. Since the chairperson has asked about the regulatory changes, first, similar with the rest of the world, after the 2008 financial crisis, the regulatory monitoring over the licensed financial entities are strict, and there is a higher request for the capital reserve. Many businesses have shifted from on-balance sheet to off-balance sheet business. So over the years have been the time when there was enhanced monitoring. It was also the period where we saw a surge in off-balance sheet business. Same in China. What about the quality of the off-balance sheet business? If this business is consolidated back to be on-balance sheet, what might be the risks to be triggered? There is another special thing about China's situation. We have a separate regulation for banking, insurance, and for the asset management businesses. Each regulatory commission has its own regulatory practice. However, asset management companies may arbitrate among different regulatory practices. For example, if it is the same deal of financing, I have a capital reserve requirement from the banking regulatory authority, like 8 to 10%. But if I have a trust company, there is a net capital requirement as well. But if I place the business in a security company or a subsidiary of a fund company, there won't be a request on the capital reserve. That's why there was the trend that we saw in shifting the on-balance sheet business to off-balance sheet business. So the State Council, Financial Stability and Financial Development Council should come in and play a bigger role in standardizing and harmonizing the different practices among different regulators. We've noticed that in developed countries, PBOC will harmonize differences regulatory standards, and regulators are just the implementing agencies for these standards. The second risk that I want to address is high leverage. In particular, the high debt in local governments and in state-owned enterprises. But though Chinese debts have risks that we need to pay attention to, but there is something different in Chinese debts. For the debts of local governments, to some extent, it was doing the right thing but using the wrong approach. Used a market approach and a high cost of financing, but it was using the debt to do the right thing, to invest in infrastructure like bridges and roads. So, on one hand, these are the assets, and on the other hand, if you look at the liabilities,
that is to say, it gives another option to China in deleveraging. Of course, I can find new debt to guarantee the liquidity, but there is another option that we can sell our assets. Why does the government hold so many assets? For every local government, they have roads, sewage treatment, bridges, local financial institutes. Every city has the credit cooperatives and the city commercial banks. So all these licenses are very interesting to the foreign financial institutions. So we need to adjust both sides of the financial sheet, a balance sheet, not just debt, but also assets. And also for SOEs, the reason for their high leverage is because the low actual return on investment. It's lower than the cost of the interest. So it's like bonds. There are a lot of SOEs in the Chinese market which played such a role. So for next step of deleveraging, we might try to strengthen the deleveraging of the low return and overcapacity based SOEs. And the reason that leverage is going up is because the return level for the real economy is low. Seen from the history of Chinese economic development, it's not that the fast credit increases the higher leverage. Actually, in certain historic moment, when the real economy has enough return on investment to cover the debt cost, then the leverage ratio will not be very high. So we need to nurture the new growth drivers so that the real economy can have a better return. In this way, we can deleverage. So, to sum up, on the outside, we need to look at U.S. dollars flow back and a mismatch in emerging markets which might be impacted. And for China, One is in the deleveraging process, we need to look at the shadow banking system off the balance sheet. In incorporating shadow banking into the balance sheet, how can we mitigate their risks? Also, in the past years, the market is used to adding leverage and loosen monitoring supply. If in the future 3 years the Chinese government's task is to deleverage, then it goes against the habit or the habitual loosened environment for the financial institutions. The M2 of China this year, the increase was brought to 1 digit. In the past, it was always 2 digits increase. So for the environment of deleveraging, we can see some effect.
Thank you. Jerry, let me come back to you. We've spent a lot of time now moving into the realm of financial policy and regulatory policy. Just take it back up to the politics, the populism. We've seen that manifest itself just in the last few weeks in the U.S. through trade rumblings, trade policy. What are some of your other thoughts around the connection between the politics, the populism, this historical cycle, and where the flashpoints may be going forward in the financial system, or how you see them in general?
I mean, it's a good question, and the thing I find surprising at the moment, how, other than in China, which I was quoted yesterday describing as a beacon of stability, I mean, in the one place where we don't have, populism rearing its ugly head, and populism here is channeled through the mechanisms of the party, other countries don't have that. And it's very hard to get across to people who aren't used to living in a society such we have here, what happens when you have populist leaders. And you look across Europe, and you look at the rise, in some places, of the far right. You look at the possibility of a far left government in the UK. You begin to realize that the electorate of these countries, and one has to deeply respect them as individuals, does not share the same beliefs or has the same drivers as the establishment does. I mean, in a sense, people on these panels, people in this room, we've been the happy establishment for the last 50 years. People don't like us. In the UK, to be a banker is a dirty word. The population of the United Kingdom hold bankers responsible for pretty much every evil in the world today. I mean, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but it's a viewpoint which you can't ignore. And politicians like Trump, and it's why I think it's very important not to overanalyze how he's going to act, because he certainly doesn't overanalyze how he's going to act. He has a gut feeling. That gut feeling, of course, has to be moderated by circumstances. But Trump could wake up any day and do anything. And it's that which our market models have completely ignored. So I think it's very tricky times, and you're seeing that same impact in many other countries. I could take you through European countries, less so in Asia. I mean, you don't really have the rise of populism in Asia. And I mentioned Confucius in my early comments. And I think that's because, the Confucian ethic, in a sense the establishment ethic, is still deeply ingrained here. People know their place, and people respect the hierarchies and respect the position of people above them. Once you lose that respect, anything can happen, and it's that which the markets find very hard to deal with, so they ignore it.
I would second your comment on bankers. I moved to Asia 5 years ago and to China so I can be considered a good person again. It was too hard in New York. Let me switch gears. Awada-san, both China and the U.S. are Japan's largest trading partners. What is the effect if this starts to continue to go the wrong way, if these tariffs come into place? How does Japan react to all this, and how does it affect Japan?
So Japan also subject to this new tariff on steel and aluminum, and Prime Minister Abe is going to United States 17 and 18 April, and to discuss with President Trump on North Korean issue, and another is this trade issue, steel and aluminum. This is although I find that Japan is an alliance, a strong alliance with the United States in the post-war era, but this time steel and aluminum, this new tariff is because of this security reason. And I find the USTR arguing steel industry capacity utilization is 72%. It must be raised to 80% by imposing a tariff, on the imported to reduce the imported steel. So, but I find anyway, Japan, of course, strongly against this protectionist trade measures, and want to rely more on the multilateral framework like TPP. TPP was, unfortunately, this again, President Trump withdrawn from this TPP. But Japan made a serious effort to reconstruct this TPP, and we have almost succeeded to have the TPP 11 and to maintain the free investment and trade system in the Pacific region. And I find it very important for Japan to promote this tendency, expanding the number of member countries into the TPP. It's interesting, UK has expressed, if it is allowed, we are going to participate in TPP. Okay, we welcome, and also we welcome Indonesia or Thailand, Korea, and other countries join this TPP, because it's very important for the world economy and also the recent technological development, free flow of data and information. This is very important, and the TPP is very well equipped with this issue, and I find that this is the most advanced FTA framework to promote this free trade in data and information. Of course, this includes some problems, like EU now moving somewhat different direction, introducing new privacy law, and Japan has also the FTA with the EU, and the remaining two issues is dispute settlement of investment, and another is this a privacy rule, and EU already introduced new rule, and Japan should be prepared to provide equivalent law for protect privacy. And I find that somewhat China is moving somewhat different direction on this information data trade, and I find that we should have more serious discussion on this issue over the future. So anyway, our position is very clear, and promote the international liberal order by constructing this regional integration, and also observation of strictly this WTO consistent trade policy.
Thank you. So Kara, Awada-san mentioned TPP. It's a good example of government action, governments working together. We've got one belt, one road, runs right through your neighborhood. And you've been the Deputy Prime Minister. Can you share just a few thoughts on the kind of the role of government? How do you deal with the risks and the hurdles and the actions taken to deal with it, whether it's gray rhinos or just moving forward?
So I think that, first of all, when it was a critical moment in the global financial crisis was, I think the principal decision was to strengthening the regulation authorities. So before we split regulation authorities out of central bank, but then we just realized that in communities like us, we need more stronger voice of regulators in order to emphasize any kind of problems. Otherwise, it will be, let's say, not so loud to clarify what kind of problem do we have. So was the first. The second is that I think that we are moving out from the too big to fail conception more to the conception of responsibility of shareholders of the especially systemic financial institutions. So this is more, I think, relevant approach. Otherwise, let's say the taxpayers will not be happy if their money using for not appropriate purposes. But I think the key lesson is we have to more focus on the let's say sustainable growth of the economy and diversification. Kazakhstan is more well known like commodities rich countries, but we're now focusing on diversification, and part of this program is to play significant role like infrastructure hub, including, and first of all maybe for Belt and Road Initiative. So here Kazakhstan is trying to diversify the let's say trade with our neighborhood, with global majors. In fact, in the structure of our trade, the 50% belongs to European Union, 20% China, and 20% Russia. So we believe that this kind of consistent and sustainable growth will allow us to mitigate any kind of potential risk. But again, I think the real grey rhino is more like the old mentality and and the previous perception how the things should be done.
Thank you. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about black swans and the problems with black swans. Now, the first problem with black swans is by definition they're unknowable, so they're very hard to discuss. So we'll detune the conversation a little bit to gray swans, which arguably are somewhat similar to gray rhinos. But gray swans, as defined, are still highly unpredictable, but have very significant consequences. So I just want to do a lightning round before we get to the Q&A and ask each panelist to take 2 or 3 minutes on the same questions. And really that question is, as we head into 2018 here, we're now in the second quarter, what gray swan worries you the most from a geopolitical, environmental, or financial perspective, and what do you think should be done to prevent it? And let me start with, let's take 2 or 3 minutes each. Dr. Ba.
I'll focus on my observation in China. Being that black swan or gray rhino, the common feature shared by two are issues that haven't been addressed fully. Being that the banking system or the local government debt, as long as these hotspot issues have been discussed widely and in great depth, it may not bring about major impact. As China's economy develops to the current stage, diversity is very pronounced. It is at a critical juncture of transitioning from the old driving forces to the new engines. GDP is stabilized, but if you look at the breakdown, there are major changes. Some industries and segments are increasing rapidly, while others might be shrinking. The economy is restructured, but the financial sector may not be quick enough to catch up such economic restructuring.
因为我自己兼中国银行业协会的首席经济学家，你看他的这个
I
风险
am
消化
the
方式
chief economist of China's
因为
banking
中国过去这么
association,
多40年的
and
高
in
速
our
增长，今天
association,
上午
we
习主席
have
讲
been
了，40年的
analyzing
平均增长率
China's
9.6%。
40 years of economic growth.
这是
As
非常
President
高速
Xi
的
has
增长。
mentioned in the morning,
所以你仔
the
细看
average
中
rate
国的
of
这个
growth was
NPL ratio，
9.5%.
它
It
形
was
成的
pretty quick.
它是一
And
个
if you
周期
look
性的
at
形成的。
NPL
它往
ratio,
往
you
是
can
在
find
经
a
济的
pattern and cycle
从
in it
高速
as
向低
well.
速的转换
When
的
the
时期，
economy
密集
is
的形成的不良
transiting
资产。
from a
它
rapid
是怎么
growth
消化的
to
呢
a slowed
就是
down
下一波的
growth,
经济增长
there is
更高速
rapid
的增长，再重
accumulation of
新起来之后
NPL.
带动了信贷的增
The
长和
next
高利差，然后轻松
boom
的把它覆盖掉。
in economic
看
growth
到你比如说
may
银行
cover
贷款贷给
the past
房地产
NPL accumulation.
你看那原来
For
贷给
example,
博鳌
when the
的
banking
一
sector
个
is
开发商，那个时候
lending
房子可
to
能最开
real
始博
estate
鳌10
sector,
年
for
前
example,
可
10
能是
years
2000
ago,
块，大概啊。
a home price
那么
for
结果它违约
apartment
抵
here
扣，
is 2,000
银行把它收
RMB
回来
per
之后，
square meters,
一
and
处置的时候，可
the
能博鳌的
bank
房子
was
现在
lending
涨到2万
to
块。
the real estate
那么
developers,
现在整个
and
经济增长
if
速度下来之后，
there is an NPL,
就
and
你
when
这
the
种
economy
消化
slows
风险
down,
的
but
机
now
制
the
可
home
能就
price
不再
is
存
much
在。
higher.
我们看到银行的利差平均慢慢在收缩，
The interest spread in
而
banks
且
is
旧经济
shrinking,
的收缩的风险慢慢就释放出来了。
and there is the
新经
unleashing
济，你
of
可能你的 portfolio
risks
里
from
占
the
比
old form of
关
economic
联度也
growth,
不大，
and
所
there
以这个
is
过
not a
程
high
也是
ratio
未来
in the new
中国
economic
的金
structure
融业
and portfolio.
要高度关注的一个
I
风险。
think this is
就
an
原来在
area
高速
where
增长
the
期，信贷
Chinese
投放增
financial
长快、
sector
利差
should
大的
pay
时
great
期，
attention to
可能是足够
when
能消
there
化的
was
风险。
very
但是整个经济
rapid
增长速
increase
度
in the
下来了
lending.
M2 的增长速
There
度
were
下来
different
了，
risks to be
可能原来
considered,
觉
but
得是
now
不是风
the
险的
increase of
一些
M2
资
is
产，可能现在慢慢
slowing
风险也是
down
体现出
some
来。
of the
也就
assets
是
which
说，
used to be good ones,
经济在
and
转型，
risks
金融
were
怎
pretty
么去
low
及
on
时的
those
跟进？
assets
如果它
are
没有及
becoming
时的跟进的
assets
话，
with a much
可
higher
能这一
risk.
部分金融机
So
构就会
when
慢慢
the
被淘汰，
economy is
它就会
transiting,
成为我们整个金融体系里
financial
边的
sector should catch up quickly.
黑天鹅或者
Otherwise,
灰犀牛啊，这
these
个
neglected
是一个
parts may
值得关
become
注的一个题目。
the black swans or the great rhino.
Jerry?
I think mine has to be the orange-haired swan, the swan with orange hair in the White House.
Thanks for saving time. Watsa-san?
Notably the United States. Now recently they had an announcement by President Trump due to the tax reform, 1.5 trillion yen, this increase of budget deficit, and by the year 2019, the budget deficit rising to 1 trillion yen. In addition, on the demand side, Federal Reserve in the process of exit. They are going to reduce the U.S. government bond holding from about 4 trillion yen to 4.3 to 3 trillion yen. That is 1.3 trillion yen, 1.4 trillion dollar government debt of U.S. government debt must be absorbed by the market. This is excess supply of government debt. On the other hand, dollar liquidity becoming smaller and smaller. And who will buy the U.S. Government debt? And I find looking at this government debt market, mispricing there, that is the term premium, since the time of quantitative easing policy, it turned out to be negative, continued to be negative even today. Mispricing implies at some point of time this must be corrected. If this is done very sharply, if for long-term government bond U.S. very sharply rising, maybe the overpriced equity market asset prices, including housing price, real estate price already higher than before the financial crisis period in the United States, all the assets down. And that implies, this is a kind of a gray swan. We can see rather big probability, and also the impact could be very large. So this is my gray swan.
Thank you. Mr. Lee?
Yes, I think the major international event that may affect international market is to what extent this current Mr. Trump's trade policy will be implemented. Because currently it is only a policy announcement. You know, China retaliate announced policy, but not really put into the practice at this moment. So if it were put into the practice, that will be a great impact on the international trade and monetary system and economic development. So I think that's a great uncertainty. Another thing is U.S. monetary policy. If U.S. withdraw this expansionary monetary policy very quickly or steadily, slowly, so that will also have different impact on the international economy. And lastly, I would say, in order to prevent this, either it's a gray rhino or black swan or gray swan event, is the banks, enterprises, their internal management, whether they can really involve or implement an internal potential management culture. That will be very important, because I don't think the doctor can solve the patient problems. The doctor is outside the supervisor, and the banks and the enterprises, they are patients. So the doctor tells a patient, oh, you have this disease, you have to take care of yourself. But if the patient doesn't do it, so the outside the supervision will not works. So therefore, I think internal management, internal potential, cultural is important. And that is the key to prevent from all these gray rhinos or black swan events from happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Garrett?
Yeah, I think in geopolitical terms, so what is the most risky moment is the segmentation of the global financial markets. So starting from Brexit back to the new policy of the U.S. administration, and I think for risk managers, I think is now kind of new norma, the rise of populism, which was mentioned previously. In terms of the geopolitical tension, what we've seen is like escalation in Syria. So we hope that it will not be escalated or expanded for global conflict, and so this is really a big uncertainty. In tech dimension, I mentioned that this capacity to adapt the new technologies, but having in mind all these high standards on principles of know your clients and anti-money laundering. So I believe that this is also a huge challenge. So in terms of financial, I think what has united all rhinos is a lot of debt. And I think that the previous corporate debt now transferred to sovereign debt, or many balance sheet of central banks being inflated. And this is, I believe, also a serious risk. And in regional terms, I think that any changes in the exchange rate policy of Central Bank of China, or depreciation of currency of in Russian Federation also would be a potential risk for us.
Thank you. So we have 15 minutes left. Let me turn it over to the audience. We'll take some questions. Just please raise your hand and identify yourself. Anyone want to start? Here.
So this morning in President Xi's speech, he mentioned that we will have more foreign investment into the domestic banking industry and other financial industry. So is China prepared enough at this moment to let this in? And is that enough to attract this foreign investment into considering there may be some invisible barriers and other things?
Mr. Li or Dr. Bond, do you want to take that?
Well, I think we certainly, Chinese financial sector has been opening for the last 40 years. There's a lot of foreign banks, foreign insurance companies, and investment banks working here in China. But to answer your question, I think we have to wait for the details come out. And that President Xi Jinping's speech is a policy announcement. We are going to further opening financial sector, but how to do it, what the details will be, I think we have to wait and see. Until that time, I cannot really say whether there is invincible barriers or other things. As I said, the legal system is very important. And I think Chinese, the foreign investors, either in financial sector or in other sectors, they will emphasize very much on the Chinese legal system's transparency and the international convention, in line with the international convention and the practice. If we can achieve that kind of goal, I think the foreign investors will be certainly confident in those policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Okay.
Hi, thank you for your speech, Lipton from Linklaters. So the question is, as there's been a lot of discussions on the debt situations in China, and as China is deleveraging, both in terms of the government debt and in terms of corporate debt, we have seen a surge of companies, in fact, tapping into overseas market in the past several years, overseas capital markets in terms of bond issuances, both for corporates and for municipal governments. So I was just wondering, what is your take on that? Do you think that's a sustainable way to solve the debt problem, or whether that factors into the Great Rhino or Black Swan discussion at all?
Any takers?
Well, I don't think China has a big issue of debt crisis or debt problem. As I said previously, and Chinese debt is mainly the state-owned enterprises debt. The government debt, both local government and the central government, is only 40% of the GDP. So the corporate debt is, as people said, is 170. It's state sector, actually, is state-owned enterprises. And then the private sector's debt is also around 50%. So they are not a big problem. When you state sector, we always call it a right pocket or left pocket of the government. So therefore, you have to. There's already happened. Government has already taken the actions to swap the debts with of the loans with the assets, with some others assets to swap. So I think there's a lot of ways to deal with those state SOEs debt problem. It will not really cause any serious problems for China, no matter it's in medium term or short term or long term perspective. Thank you.
Iwata-san, let me just follow up with a question. Oh, go ahead, Jerry, please.
Can I just add very quickly? I do think that international due diligence has not always been good enough when it comes to companies issuing in overseas markets. I mean, sometimes the excitement of the transaction, the excitement of the deal has transcended good sense. Now, I think standards have got much better, and we heard earlier the importance of governance standards generally being improved in the Chinese market. But I suspect there are some grey rhinos lurking in some of the issuance that's been done in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to build on Chairman Lee's comment. Japan, as you mentioned earlier, runs a very, very high debt-GDP ratio, but the Japanese largely finance it internally. Do you see that model as a model for China?
Yes, I think there is interesting comparison between Japan's bubble burst period and the China faces today. As I said, our corporate debt during bubble period 140%, but a large portion of this debt becoming the non-performing asset at the banking sector. This is a private corporate debt and the private banking sector digesting this non-performing asset amounting about 100 trillion yen. This is a very sizable digestion of non-performing asset. It took bubble burst in 1990, and this is finalized 2003 by the public money injection to Risona Bank. 13 years, during this 13 years, what happened during this period? If you look at the growth rate, bubble period, we have 5% growth rate, and then down, and 1%. Why? Because the leveraging implies less investment by corporate sector because they had excess debt, excess equipment, excess employment. They should restructure, and therefore cutting the new investment. A lower investment ratio implies lower growth. And I find this is the case of Japan, not the US or UK market-based economy. Our financial system is banking sector-based one. And also the debt is domestic currency denominated and not the foreign currency denominated debt. And therefore, this deleveraging process is well contained, within Japan. But the major impact is on this low investment and the low potential growth rate. And I'm afraid we have made our center medium-term and the long-term forecast of China and making comparison in the Asian crisis, Thailand and other cases, and Sweden. How about this deleveraging process affected investment ratio and the growth ratio? And according to our exercise, there is a possibility China's growth rate down from current 6.5% to 3% in the year 2030. Gradual managed decline of growth. IMF also similar exercises, somehow higher than this, but providing 3 scenarios. And our scenario is corresponding to the lowest growth scenario.
Thank you. Other questions? Please.
Hi, this question is for Kenneth. At the beginning, you mentioned the title should be Financial Risks, Black Swan, Grey Rhino, and the Minsky Moment, and also maybe add the Trump Twitter. And I think Trump's Twitter is really a risk factor nowadays. In the past year, he has sent over 2,000 tweets, and some with major implications, both for the financial market and also for government policies. Can you, maybe you and the panel, elaborate on how financial markets and governments should deal with Trump's tweets?
Yeah, as the moderator, I'll defer to the panel, but I'll just echo the orange swan comment of Jerry's earlier. So anyone want to take on the specifics around the President Trump's impact on markets? Not really.
Well, the kind of essence of a tweet was you have to do it in what it is 152 characters. It's not always easy summarizing complex geopolitical issues into 152 characters. So I think that's almost sufficient answer to this. But they come with increasing frequency, and because they come, coming back to my earlier comments, they are coming from the President of the United States, who was democratically elected as President of the United States. These are his thoughts.
Thank you. Another question?
Good afternoon. Our company is in the Internet innovation business to try to open up the business platforms. We have a business to streamline the financial and lifestyle. So the concept of openness and innovation, how can we mitigate the financial risks that actually affect the ordinary people's lives to erase their hard feelings?
I'm not sure I completely understood the question in translation. I'm not sure I got the hard feelings part.
I cannot say I fully understand, but anyway, I will try.
Yeah. Thank you.
Although he speaks the Chinese. 这样说啊，就是大家都想参与这个金融。
So everybody wants to participate in the finance sector and benefit from that.
能够使金融风险
Maybe
不那么聚集。我想他
they want
可能是
to
这个意思。
diverse the financial risks so that it cannot be so concentrated. I don't know whether he means that, but that's my understanding of Chinese. It's not the translator's fault. Financial sector is a highly risky sector. If the 1.4 billion population are all in the financial sector, that would be a disaster. I don't think we can do that. Finance should be done by professional people and institutions. But the financial system is changing. Because the Chinese economy is very much market-based nowadays. And they can include a lot of the SMEs and some individual operators. How can Chinese financial sector serve these communities better is a big challenge for us nowadays. So China's finance sector is relatively concentrated, but it's facing a very scattered market segment. There is a mismatch in the financial service providers and the demand. So we need to develop a lot of small and medium-sized banks to serve the small and medium-sized customers. This is a very important task. If we can do it better, the concern of our friend here might be mitigated or erased. Thank you.
So, as far as I understood also, the question is the following. So now we have a lot of the new technologies which is coming to the market, which is from one side simplifying the people's life, for example, like different platform like peer-to-peer or online crediting or new payment system. And from the other side, not simplify the life of regulation authorities, which should know from the beginning what is the risk this technology, particularly technology, can bring. So I think in these terms, what is pro-development-oriented regulation authorities are doing, and this is a great example in London or Singapore, so they're creating so-called sandbox mechanism. So this is a sandbox where the young company can come, testify their technology, and it's for a certain period, like usually it's from 6 months to 2 years, and then jointly with regulation authorities clarify what kind of risks are there, design the particularly, let's say, parameters, how the this risk should be measured and how they has to be mitigated. This is the only way how to bring this company. If mostly the companies have failed during this period, but if they survive, you can get the full license to provide financial services to the wider group of people. Because it's very important to avoid any kind of risk, because you are providing it to the people of your country, and if there is, let's say, risk inside or different skeletons, then it will be the joint problem. So in order to avoid it in advance, there is a sandbox mechanism. This is one side of the question. But from the other side, now is the moment when the technologies are coming, not waiting anyone. And I think China is a great example, how China leapfrogged in financial services to resolve the issues of the financial inclusion, for example. You all using the WeChat. For example, in Europe, there is let's say, the people using WhatsApp, and there is no payment system inside. Because it's a huge lobby not to allow any kind of payments or its problems or whatever. But here it was like, I don't know, brave decision, or it was by inertia. And here is like, it was done, and now we have to think about, you have to think about how to mitigate any kind of risk. But it was a huge revolutionary approach. The same example, not only in China, it's like famous Eastern Africa case in PESA, which is resolved financial inclusion. Again, in the countries where the half of the population unbanked, I think it's very important. So, and we see that it's like new generation creating technology by technology, and this is it's a new fact, and it's better to lead this movement rather than to ignore it.
Great, thank you very much. And we're out of time, so I just want to wrap up. I mean, great discussion. It's not easy discussion on predicting the unpredictable, managing the unpredictable. I feel better about it an hour and a half later than I did an hour and a half ago, but lots of issues in the world. I thought it was a fabulous discussion. I want to thank the panelists for all their insights, and also the Boao Forum for all the work they've done in this event. So thank you very much, panelists.
you.